We are living in a culture of lies and disbelief, so we stand on the other side and disagree. Whether doctrine, debates, or history, we gon' take it to the Bible so the world can see that we got the truth, so we got to let them know. Gospel center proof proves itself, we gon' let it show. Ladies and gentlemen, get ready, cause here we go. Straight out of Phoenix, Urban Theologian Radio. Cause the streets is watching, start of knowledge is guiding. Cause the streets is watching, cause the streets is watching, start of knowledge is guiding. Brother podcast on your streets, yo B, come and set the scene.
What's up, y'all? This is Vocab Malone, Urban Theologian Radio, joining you again in July, where it is super hot here in Phoenix, Arizona, where we broadcast from. Thanks again, Marcus, all the cats at Apologia, letting us record here in this nice space. And in fact, today on Urban Theologian Radio, I couldn't get Bob, I couldn't get Ramon. They're like celebrities. I can't track them down in the studio. So we got an Apologia guy. What's up, Austin? Introduce yourself to the people. Co-host today.
What up, what up?
All right, that's Austin, and your last name is?
Jensen.
What do people need to know about you?
I just finished at Moody. I'm doing my internship and now moving out with Apologia Radio. So I'll be living with none other than the Marcus Pittman.
Oh, shoot.
I know.
That's a lot of red beards in one house, bro.
Yeah, it's going to be the ginger pad.
All right. Hey, what's up with you in video games, homie?
I like video games, man.
What you about to do with that?
Well, hopefully we're going to put out a show pretty soon. We're going to start broadcasting. So,
all right. So there's today's co-host. And today's guest is none other than Hannah Spivey. She authored a book called Why I Abandoned the Hebrew Israelite Religion, and it's subtitled A Memoir Self-Help Guide. Welcome to Urban Theologian Radio. Hannah, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Now, are you able to say this? If not, it's okay. I understand. But whereabouts do you be staying? You know, like where are you hailing from? Where's your neck of the woods?
Well, I'm originally from Florida, and I currently live in Arkansas.
All right. Well, in most of your story, does it involve Florida? Is most of it involved with that?
I would say it starts off with Florida, and then it goes into Georgia.
All right, okay. So that's a little bit of background. Excuse me, I'm sorry. So your book is pretty rare, and that's really one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. So the way this interview came about is it looks like you saw we were doing some stuff with Hebrew Israelites online, and you just hit me up and said, hey, props to what you're doing. I wrote a book. Check it out, And I hit you back and said, yeah, I've read your book. I got your book. I know who you are. I know what you're talking about. And I said, hey, let's do an interview sometime. And so why do you think what we're about to talk about today, why do you feel it's so important you need to write a book about it and then do interviews about it? Why is it near and dear to your heart?
Well, I wanted to give my perspective on it. And like you were mentioning, it's a very rare book. And because there are a lot of women who are still in that type of religion, and then there are also women who left that type of religion. The women who are still in that type of religion, they are afraid to come forward and speak about how they're being mistreated because they're afraid of being punished and stigmatized. They're afraid of being punished by the God in that religion, and they're afraid of the stigma that they're going to, get from their fellow Hebrew Israelite counterparts.
All right.
I wanted to give other women a voice, to encourage other women to come out and just speak up, because there are not many women other than myself who are speaking about this on a much wider platform.
All right, and then with you might be there's not many that I know of what you might call second generation Hebrew Israelites, but your father actually was a Hebrew Israelite, correct?
He still is, yeah.
He still is. Has he read your book?
He read the first couple of pages of my book, and he didn't like what he read.
All right.
And that's okay.
All right. Now, your main, let's narrow this down. Your main, excuse me, man, I need to drink my water today. I'm so sorry, guys. Your main experience was with which camps or groups out of the Hebrew Israelite movement? Because we're not talking about all, we're just talking about your experience. What are some of the main identities so people can understand, okay, that's who she's talking about?
I was part of the IOG Church, which stands for Israel of God, in Stone Mountain, Georgia.
Okay.
And I was also part of Shamre Hatorah, or HaShatorah, however it's pronounced, in the metropolitan part of Atlanta.
All right. With the Israel of God, what can you tell us as far as like maybe historical background or kind of the way that church is in general? Like they have meetings, how many people, just in general, what you know about that?
Well, to my understanding, the IOG Church, the Israel of God Church, they have several camps around the country. They have one in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
They have one in Florida, I think, and they also have one in Georgia, and they have one in Illinois.
All right.
In the Chicago area. And they are Messianic Hebrew Israelites.
Okay.
They pretty much call on Jesus Christ the way a Seventh-day Adventist Christian would, because they're like Seventh-day Adventists, except they call themselves Hebrew Israelites.
Okay.
They have Bible studies. They will have Bible studies on Wednesday nights, and they will have their Sabbaths, their assemblies on the Sabbath, which is on Saturdays. And women were not allowed to wear pants on the Sabbath. They had to cover their heads, while the men had to uncover their heads because the men are seen as their covering.
All right. What attracted you to Israel of God specifically, and how long were you involved?
Well, it's pretty interesting because how I got involved with them was, at the time I was trying to, be around like-minded people. Being a Hebrew Israelite, there weren't any Hebrew Israelites in Florida that I knew of. So the person who pretty much helped me relocate to Atlanta, he was part of the Israel of God Church. So it wasn't like I picked that church. It was more so of me meeting somebody who was in that church. And I ended up staying with one of the members of that church. And that's how I got involved with them. And I just didn't agree with the doctrine that they were promoting, because I know that Hebrew Israelites don't call on the name Jesus Christ, but that particular camp did, and they still do to this day. And I used to hate to go to Sabbath classes on Wednesday nights, because the person who I was staying with, he was the person that gave me a roof over my head. I was staying with him, and he was a nice guy and everything. He wasn't fresh or making any type of advances or anything like that. But it was just that only reason why I ended up going to that church was because I was staying with a member from that church, and I was just trying to get up on my feet and trying to meet more like-minded people in the Atlanta area. And I was just trying to make a life there in Atlanta.
All right. Other females in the movement that you met, do they have a similar story? How are they involved? Why are they involved?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Well, at this point, I don't really have any Hebrew Israelite female friends at this moment. But when I did have Hebrew Israelite friends, they weren't really part of that congregation.
Okay.
But they were women who I did meet via social media. And some of them, one of them, to what I understand, I guess she's still part of it, but I no longer keep in contact with her. But she didn't really have the best experiences. Now, I do have a good friend who I'm still friends with. I met her the same year I had relocated to Georgia, and I was part of that camp. And her name is Lily, and she's no longer a Hebrew Israelite, but she didn't have the best experiences.
Okay.
And that's the reason why she left, and she was the person who pretty much encouraged me out of it about, I would say, at the latter of 2014.
Okay. Now, the man you're speaking about that you linked up with, is this the same man in which you have a chapter entitled My Personal Encounter with a Hebrew Israelite Crackhead? Is that the same guy?
Oh, no, it's a different guy, totally different guy. The person who I was staying with when I first got there, he was in his 60s. I mean, he had kids of his own, so he was a gentleman. He was not that type of person.
Okay. Just so, see, we're not trying to say everybody, involved is this way. This is just a personal experience. Well, what about the man that you call a Hebrew Israelite crackhead?
He was a guy that I met at this, the next congregation I had went to.
Okay.
And at that congregation, they're non-Messianic Hebrew Israelites. They don't believe in a Messiah.
Okay.
And he, in a sense, considered himself a Messiah. I mean, he put on this whole facade. He was trying to be something he wasn't, multiple personalities. I mean,
Wait, hold on.
in-
He considered himself to be the Messiah. How literally do you mean that? Do you saying like figuratively, or you mean he actually like? What do you mean by that?
because due to them being non-Messianic, it's
Yeah.
kind of, I know it's a little confusing, but I guess he compared himself to being Yahshua because Yahshua was the anointed one. He was one of the anointed ones, and I guess I don't know. I guess he considered himself Messianic in a sense because he considered himself Yahshua, but he was a very conflicted person. And he's not the only person who called himself Yahshua. There's a lot of black males in that calls himself Yahshua.
Okay. Now he was he the leader of this particular camp, or was he just?
No, he was just a member. He was considered one of the guardians, like the people that kind of like, watched the premises of the camp. Him and another guy. And I also mentioned him in the book.
Oh, Yehuda?
And they were
talking about Yehuda?
I think, yeah.
Yeah.
And I changed their names, but I didn't change his name for a reason. Only reason why I kept his name is because it's not his real name.
Oh, I got you. Yeah, I got you.
Right. So they're like the guardians and that's what Shamre stands for, guardian. So they were like the quote unquote guardians of Shamre, and they were actually living in that temple at the time because they really didn't have their own place. So they didn't really have their stuff together. It was more like the elders was just giving them a place to stay, and while they were staying there, their role was to just kind of like watch over the place, pretty much.
All right. So, one thing that some of the camps say is like, you got to have a job, and you can't be leeching off of, women and females. Other camps, though, seem to kind of almost allow or encourage that type of behavior. This is my understanding. I see a difference in some of the approaches about, having a so-called Jake job and this and that. The way I read the book is it seems like this camp, these dudes were kind of, not really holding it down.
Were bombs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And there's also an issue of drug addiction, it seems.
Yes.
All right. So, no, that's no good with that. Now, were either of these, because this is interesting to hear, from a female perspective, either of these camps were polygamous?
I wouldn't say, I would say the first camp I was part of, they didn't really push the polygamy doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
The person who's over that, his name is Bowie. And he from what I understand, he was not a supporter of polygamy.
Okay.
But the second camp I was part of, one of the elders who I also mentioned in the book, now he does have 2 wives.
Okay.
So you have some that are for polygamy and some that were they weren't against it, but they didn't necessarily practice polygamy. Okay.
All right. Now, anything more you want to say sort of about maybe some specific experiences, I'm not asking about. I've read the whole book. I mean, it's really intriguing. And, some of this, Hannah, I got to tell you, this book is brutal. So if people are going to pick up this book, you got to be ready. You got to be ready for in what you call invective, meaning Hannah goes after people in a very no-holds-barred fashion. And just to be clarification, we're not speaking to someone who's an ex-Hebrew Israelite and then has become a Christian or something. And Hannah, I'm not saying that like it's judgmental. I'm just speaking where I understand you're at and all that. We're speaking to someone who is an ex-Hebrew Israelite and gives their perspective, but that's the main perspective that we're focusing on that it's written from. So pick up the book. It's entertaining in one sense, but of course very sad in another sense. And it'll just give you some insight. Again, it's one person's perspective, but it is something that I think needs to be talked about because the issue of being a woman involved in this really is not discussed very often. And so there's a very unique opportunity to say, well, let me get a window. Let me get a slice. Hannah, anything you want to kind of bring out or mention that you feel is important about your experience about with either camp? And then in a second, I'm going to let my main man chilling with me, Awesome. I'll let him ask some questions. But anything else you want to bring out about that we maybe haven't discussed yet? Like important things, you think that people should be aware of or that were maybe fundamental or transitional for you, something like that.
Definitely, because you got people who come into that type of walk, they come in, in different ways. Either they were raised up in it, or they were introduced to it from somebody who's already part of it. And then, a lot of times, nobody really talks about the polygamy part. You got women who are being forced into plural marriages. You got women who are just following these plural marriages against their will because they feel like, that's what their God allowed. And that's not really being discussed, because women in that type of culture, whatever their man is, for example, if they have to follow like at least 3 to 4 gods. And that's why I mentioned in the book. If her husband is non-Messianic, that means she has to follow what's in the Bible. She has to follow what her husband tells her. She has to follow that God, the main God. And then if her husband is non-Messianic, then she's serving about 3 gods. If he is Messianic, then she got to follow a Messiah. She got to follow the main God, I guess the father of the son. She got to follow the Bible, and she got to follow her husband. So it's almost like she is whatever her husband is, in a sense, because she's like second nature to her husband. There are women who also refer to their husbands as master or Lord, which I find to be very disturbing. And so and I also want to touch on the domestic violence cases within the Hebrew community. And a lot of times it gets swept under a rug. You have women who also lost their lives in that type of culture.
That's true.
And it's not being discussed. There's no woman that's really coming forward and that's actually talking about it in depth the way I'm doing, because it's important to me, because you got a lot of women who are younger than me that's coming up in this stuff, and then women who are about my age or older than me that's getting into this stuff and not really knowing what they're really getting themselves into.
So
now, I'm sorry.
Well, so I have heard of, for example, Yahweh ben Yahweh, and of course there's a lot of murder involved, and he's right there actually in Miami, where he has some ties, and there was murder involved with that whole Nation of Yahweh thing, and it's trippy, man. There's still followers of this dude still around. I run into him sometimes. And then I did hear about a case, I think in one of the Carolinas, where a Hebrew Israelite dude who had a couple wives shot his, I think, stepson because he was showing some tendencies towards same-sex attraction. So he shot and murdered him. That was a case I heard about. And then I heard about actually the person who assassinated or killed Martin Luther King's mother in church was actually a self-proclaimed Hebrew Israelite. But I haven't heard yet, I'm going to look into it, about like women who have been killed because of this. So that's domestic violence thing. I haven't heard like a case, but I'm gonna look into that to see if that is something that's there as well.
A lady named Latangla Lawrence. She was gunned down in October of last year by her husband. She came into it because I guess he's the one who introduced her to it. But she leaves behind 2 special needs kids.
Oh wow, where's she from? Who is she involved with? Do you know?
This actually took place in Phoenix, where you are.
What?
Are you in Phoenix?
Yeah. This happened
she was gunned down in Phoenix.
Latangla Lawrence, Phoenix. I wonder what else I would need for a key search. I'm gonna look it up when we're talking and see if I can pop it up, because that's that's sad but enlightening. I'm gonna look that up in a little bit, but let me get my man Austin right now. Austin, so you're on the line with Hannah. We got a few minutes left. Interesting perspective, as you could tell. And you're hearing some questions. You went through the book as well. What would you like to ask her or talk to her about, Austin?
Yeah, I'm looking through the book, and I'm just curious, from your perspective, what do you think the reasoning is behind just them ascribing to Black Hebrew Israelism, in your opinion?
They believe that it's their heritage, it's in their blood.
Yeah.
They believe that they have relation to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Right. And so I'm looking at it, and from
the scriptures,
from what I'm reading,
they believe that is their lineage.
Right. From your perspective, I guess I'm asking more psychologically, sociologically. It seems there's a lot of misogyny and a lot of they're just trying to express a lot of power. What would you say to that?
Well, because with them blaming everything on white supremacy, the next person, the next group of people who they can hurt next, because they know that they can't really go against, the system the next group of people they're going to hurt next is the women, because in their Bible, of course, the woman is seen as the weaker vessel. So a lot of them take the scriptures and they twist it and they make it into their own doctrine. They make it into their own understanding, and that's why there are so many Hebrew. Excuse me, that's my baby in the background.
That's all right.
Crying. But there's a lot of camps that they spawn from, people's own misunderstanding and their own interpretation of the Bible. About how some camps don't allow women to wear dresses. Some camps are okay with women wearing dresses. It just depends. I mean, a lot of these camps are held by men.
Right.
I don't really get to see women that can. I mean, the camp that I was part of, the women, they were allowed to stand up and ask questions, but they were not allowed to actually lead the assembly, as opposed to like standing behind a podium and to give their own, their own interpretation of the Bible. And I think the reason why there's so much misogyny is because the God they serve is male. Everything is they follow the forefathers within the Bible. All the scribes in the Bible are all males. Even though there are women in there, they talk about like Judith, who pretty much led an army. She was like the stand-up type of woman.
Oh, you're talking about Deborah.
Really
you talking about Deborah?
Huh?
You talking about Deborah in the
Deborah.
book of?
Yeah, I'm sorry,
Deborah.
It's Deborah.
Yeah,
she led the war. They don't talk about that as often.
It's so funny you mentioned Deborah. The co-host on the show, Pastor Bob, he got caught up at work. Yesterday, he preached at Roosevelt Community Church, downtown Phoenix, where we're all part of. And the sermon was on that chapter. And so it was specifically about Deborah and Barak. And it was really good to hear the perspective and what he had to bring to the table. And that sermon should be up online, actually, by the time this airs. So I encourage people to look for that sermon on Judges, because this summer our church is actually going through the book of Judges. Now, let me say, so Hannah, you brought something I didn't know about. So I did find the woman you're speaking of, and I found a couple local news stories on her, and it looks like a tragic, sad thing. I can't find yet, so I'm going to still track this down, a direct identification, at least in these news reports, about anything about ethnicity or religious ties or anything like that. Do you know, I'm not saying like a website, but do you know any way that we could be, is there a way to track down that aspect of it, that this is a Hebrew Israelite person? I haven't been able to find that. Like, how did you know Facebook is the way? Is that how you heard about it?
Yeah, you can type in her name in a search engine on Facebook, and you'll find like Hebrew Israelites who talked about her death, and they don't mention it in the news reports.
Okay.
I noticed that too.
Yeah.
But you'll learn more about it in depth and more in detail on Facebook.
Okay, I'm gonna look at that. Now, this is interesting. This happened. This literally happened down the street. This is where I stay. Like, this isn't just in Phoenix. This happened down the street from where I physically live. This is trippy. I don't remember even hearing about this, but this is like, I mean, I could be there in a jump. So I know the exact address they're talking about and everything. This is trippy. I'm gonna look more into that. But again, now I want people to. I'm gonna slow down for a second. Now let me just give a disclaimer as we wind down here. This interview and even this discussion about some of these murder victims and this and that, we're not saying all Hebrew Israelites are about this. We're not saying, at least I'm not saying. I mean, like, we're not saying. I mean, everybody is misogynistic and wicked and bad and evil when everybody's double, two-tongued. Right. And I know as soon as the show goes out, people are going to say, well, you didn't spend time talking about Christianity's hypocrites and this and that and all that. Now, again, if you listen to our radio show, I'm not saying we talk about it every week, but we do talk about issues within the Christian church. And we do talk about, like, prosperity gospel, so-called prosperity gospel pimps, hustlers in the pulpit, like, because we believe the pulpit's a place to preach God's word and to glorify him, not to, stuff your pockets. So we talk about that type of stuff, false teachers. So it ain't like we never talk about it and we think that everyone that calls themselves a Christian is perfect and this and that. But at the same time, this is relevant to the discussion nonetheless, especially when you're talking about a smaller group. So it makes up a larger percentage of it, kind of thing. But still looking into it, and that's interesting. So, Austin, final question for Hannah as we wind down, and then I'm going to give her a chance to kind of give a final, plug or shout out whatever she wants to do as we wind down with what I think is a very enlightening discussion. But final question or commentary, Austin?
Yeah, I actually do have one more question. Going through, I can't remember which chapter it is, what it's called, but you gave a list of questions that I think were addressed to Hebrew Israelites. I guess The one question I would have for you is, it seems like you care very much about women. What would you say to the women in the camps?
Well, I say to women in the camps, I would pretty much just tell them that, I mean, it's not to their advantage. Honestly, it really isn't. I mean, their whole system is patriarchal. I mean, if you are told that you can't speak, even though that's what the Bible says, but I would just encourage them to really think outside of what they've been taught and to do more in-depth research about what they believe in. And if they really believe that they are like descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then they should really do a real DNA test.
You're bringing out the DNA. Yes,
Yeah.
People watch Maury Povich and they trust the DNA test there, but all of a sudden, to back up their claims, they're not willing to be like, all right, let's see what's up. Because I know right now, if you're in a camp and you're listening to this, if somebody come out the woodwork, guess what? I'm pregnant and it's yours. You're gonna go do a DNA test, but all of a sudden you running around. Oh, I'm actually a son of Abraham. Well, let's do a DNA test. Let's see if we could trace some lineage back to what's called the Levant area, or let's see if it's like what we understand most people who came over here from the transatlantic slave trade to be of Bantu origin, because Bantu is the people group primarily that was kidnapped out of West Africa, and most, not all, but most of the folks who ended up in the Western Hemisphere are Bantu origin, and there's nothing, being Bantu is something to be proud of. And I think it's a shame that kind of like people are kind of what I feel hijacking someone else's story and lineage and ancestry and history, when Bantu needs to be looked at as beautiful and talked about and discussed and not put in the dust. But when you look at Bantu and what we can learn about those groups on the Ivory Coast, there's a lot of positive things to be said. And instead, there's kind of this subversion happening. And I think it's a bad thing. So that's kind of just like I just jumped on a little soapbox there. Let me get back off. But the man's name is Tyrone Tinson. So I did find that Tyrone Tinson. I'm going to look him up and see if we can see that he was indeed identified with the Hebrew Israelite group, because this would be interesting, because if it's a local sect, I could probably talk to some of these members. I could find out more about this. If it's a local camp that I'm familiar with, this would be could be very interesting. So I'm going to look this up. So thank you again, Hannah Spivey. The book is Why I Abandoned the Hebrew Israelite Religion, a memoir, self-help guide, Hannah Spivey. And I did give a little disclaimer there. It's going to have some invective. It's funny and entertaining and sad all at the same time. Hannah, you do have some natural way with words, and so that's intriguing. You got some interesting stuff in there. Half of this stuff I was like, man, I don't want to laugh at what she's saying here, but this is kind of funny. But at the same time, be ready, everybody. It's not a G-rated book, and so I am telling you that it's very frank and very direct with its words. And so you better be prepared. Don't read this out loud at your next Christmas party. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, it does give you an intriguing and enlightening perspective. Hannah, thank you so much for joining us today on Urban Theologian Radio. And Hannah, if it's all right, I know that you're in a different place with everything, but as soon as this ends and I hang this up, me and my friend Austin, we're going to pray for you. We want to continue to pray that the Lord would seek you and you would seek him. And like I said, I know you're in a different place with that. I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm just saying, just know that you're going to be prayed for, Hannah. And with that, anything else you want to say?
Just shout out to my true supporters. Shout out to Crystal and Lily and Dread Lioness, because they're also former Hebrew Israelites.
Right on. Thank you very much. UTR is signing off. Be sure to visit us at urbantheologianradio.com. Follow us on iTunes. Please subscribe. Give us some stars. Give us a review. It helps us. And also check us out on Facebook. Check us out on Twitter at Urban Theologic, and on Instagram and on our YouTube channel. So we'll see you all next week. Thank you, Hannah, and I hope you have a blessed day. Peace out.